Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw. I'm Salia Strzemska. Georgians have just completed their vote in what has been labeled as the most significant elections in the country's history, bound to determine Georgia's future, a choice between Russia or Europe. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. G7 agrees to proceed with a multi-billion loan for Ukraine using frozen Russian assets. Police detain wanted Polish fashion entrepreneur in Dominican Republic. Thousands of people gathered at a far-right anti-immigration protest in central London. Georgia's parliamentary elections have just ended. The exit polls disagree on who will be able to form a majority. Both the governing Georgia Dream Party and the opposition groups have claimed victory. The question is, what now? We move to Tbilisi to hear from our correspondent Ovidiusz Nicieja. Good evening, Ovidiusz. So what is the mood on the streets and what do we know about the actual exit polls?
Right, so right as you said, the two sides are claiming their victory in these elections. 2 hours ago, when the polling stations closed, I was at the Georgian Dream headquarters, and what we saw there were fireworks, celebrations, people honking on the streets. The mood there was very celebratory. The founder of the party, but also the prime minister, were celebrating Georgian Dream victory. This is the party that has led Georgia for the past 12 years. And opposition here in Georgia says that the party has become increasingly pro-Russian. They have introduced a series of reforms that have made the European prospect of Georgia more distant. Now, the opposition also says that it has won these elections and that Georgian Dream should concede, so we should wait for official results to call the winner of these elections. Although, with 70% of the precincts counted here in Georgia, it looks like the Georgian Dream, the ruling party, has more than 50% of the votes. So at least now it looks like the Georgian Dream will be able to cling on to power. If that happens for the next time, it means that Georgia may fail to uphold its sovereignty and become yet another hostage in this plan of Russia to become a new colonizer in this area. But we're waiting still for these results. Many people here, we're still celebrating both with European flags and with the Georgian Dream flags. So we're waiting here still for the results. It looks like very interesting days are coming up. But take a look at my report at all the irregularities and alleged fraud during election day and even earlier than that.
Fistfights outside polling stations, reports of ballots with pen marks on them and more. This is what alleged election fraud looks like in the Caucasus. The pro-European president, who cast her ballot early in the morning, later came out with a condemnation of the incidents at the polling stations.
In some cases, media equipment has been destroyed and direct acts of violence have occurred. Groups have gathered with the sole purpose of provoking conflict and confrontation. This is extremely regrettable as it damages our country's image and reputation. It reflects weakness, and I urge everyone not to be intimidated by it.
The president added that she tried to contact the government about these incidents, but the ruling Georgian Dream ignored her. Irregularities and fraud were also reported before the election day.
What Georgian Dream is doing right now, it is directly from the Russian playbooks. They're directly trying to fearmonger, they're directly trying to frighten the Georgian public, and all of it, their very unhealthy attitude towards family values, all that they have been doing to, again, frighten the Georgian public, all of it has begun long before the election day.
Russia is believed to have a big stake in the election.
Russia has almost openly supported the Georgian Dream, which is the ruling party in Georgia, in these parliamentary elections. The top representatives of the Kremlin made several key statements in this regard.
The question remains whether any of the running parties will try to contest the results of the vote.
who seems to have no doubt about the results of these elections is the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, who has already congratulated the Georgian Dream on winning yet another election. So far we have 70% of votes counted. 53% of these votes are for the ruling party, the Georgian Dream. However, still the votes from abroad are yet to be counted, and these votes tend to favor the pro-European opposition. However, we already have reports that the pro-European opposition parts, at least some parties in that coalition, are already saying that these elections have been falsified.
Thank you, Vidush, for this comprehensive report, and do keep us updated once you know more. And now moving to Ukraine, where Russia continues its barbaric attacks on the country. Latest strikes killed 3 people, including a child in Dnipro, while a teenager and another person lost their lives in the country's capital, Kyiv. Here's a roundup of the key developments from our reporter Krzysztof Panek.
A high-rise residential building in Kyiv was damaged by a Russian strike. As the attack took place during the night, most residents were at home.
A teenage girl born in 2009 died. She was 14 years old. 6 people were wounded. 2 of them are in hospital. All the others received help.
Dnipro, Ukraine's 4th largest city, also suffered an overnight attack. Russian missiles struck a bar in the city center, as well as a residential building in another part of the city. A child was among those who lost their lives in the attack.
The enemy has insidiously attacked the city of Dnipro. On the night from Friday to Saturday, actually on a day off, when all the families were in their homes. We see that a missile has hit a residential building. There are victims, dead and wounded.
A number of people were also killed in Russian attacks in the Kherson region. Russian strikes were less damaging in early autumn. This is likely due to Russia stockpiling missiles for strikes against energy infrastructure during the winter. Saturday's attack may be an indication of the beginning of such attacks. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko offered to facilitate the exchange of prisoners of war and bodies of fallen soldiers between Russia and Ukraine. Such exchanges have been mediated by the United Arab Emirates in recent months.
If the Russians want it, the Ukrainians want it, we will continue to facilitate this process. The Ukrainian side has no objection to working with us and practically on our territory. We are carrying out this humanitarian mission. We will carry it out, also for children. I support this.
Former Lithuanian President Dalia Grybauskaitė has warned that Russia will remain a threat to the European Union as long as Vladimir Putin remains in power.
Putin's Russia today is a dangerous neighbor. It's not just Russia, but Putin's Russia. And especially because then Putin started open war towards its neighbors, he has no way back. And until the end of his time, he will be in the war mood. And that means in the more intensive war mood or less intensive, he will be always dangerous to the European Union and to its neighbors.
The possible deployment of North Korean soldiers to the front lines continues to be a concern for Kyiv. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Agency claims to have intercepted phone calls between Russian soldiers suggesting that North Korean soldiers are already in Russia's Kursk region. The recorded soldiers seemed unhappy with the prospect of fighting alongside North Koreans. Leaders of the G7 group reached an agreement on Friday on using frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. Kyiv will be granted a $50 billion loan, which will be backed using the earnings derived from the frozen assets. The funds are set to start flowing to Ukraine before the end of the year.
And now another important election. Tomorrow, Bulgaria will head to the polls for the 7th time in just over 3 years. But if you're expecting that this time will be the charm, you may be disappointed. Joining us now from Sofia is Don Arlev. Hi, Don. So what are the expectations ahead of tomorrow's vote?
Well, spoiler alert, actually the expectations are not very high here. And as you mentioned just earlier, 7th election since April of 2021. There was only a government in place stable for just about 6 months. So therefore, there's been several elections every few months or so. And actually, everybody I've talked to so far here has said they're not even going to vote. So the expectation that maybe 30% turnout could be expected this time around, well, I certainly have my doubts based on all the people that I've talked to today of whether it'll even hit 30%. Now here, I'm going to share some statistics for you to help explain exactly why this problem is here in Bulgaria. Trust in the Bulgarian parliament is an all-time low at 6%, according to BTV and Market Links. Only 17% have trust in the current caretaker government. And according to a Gallup poll, only 10% have confidence in the honesty of elections, and that is down from a high of 36%, and that is back in 2006 when Bulgaria joined the European Union. And this is well below the average across the European Union, which is at 62%. So, in a nutshell, there aren't very big expectations, and the main reason is because the status quo is just basically what people do not want. They don't even want to go to the ballot box to cast their votes because they're simply sick of all the political elite and figures that are currently running the parties that have the biggest majority. So let's look at the parties, if you will. Just as in the last elections, GERB is expected to get about 24.8% of the vote. They are a center-right party. Then you have Revival, which is a pro-Russian party. They're actually expected to do a little bit better this time, coming in second with 15.6% of the vote. And then we have coming in third, We Continue the Change Democratic Bulgaria at 15.1%. And then the Turkish community, which was the former MRF Alliance, they have split. They are now the Alliance for the Rights and Freedoms, 8.5%, and the New Beginning at 5.8%. You got about 15% or so that make up all the other smaller parties that are expected to hit the threshold of about 4%. Of course, we'll be reporting on this again tomorrow when everybody goes to the ballot box. Now back to you.
Thank you, Don. Much appreciated. Yes, Sunday is the important day for Bulgaria. And we're moving on to the Middle East. In the latest flare-up of hostilities, Israel targeted Iran, hitting 20 military targets in the country. The move came in response to what Israel said were months of attacks by Iran and its proxies. That's not all. Just a few hours ago, Iran's proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, fired 80 rockets in the direction of Israel. Grzegorz Płaza has more.
The Israel Defense Forces reported strikes on Iranian missile production facilities and air defense systems, emphasizing that they had avoided Iran's nuclear sites and energy infrastructure. At least 2 Iranian soldiers were killed in the attack.
We conducted targeted and precise strikes on military targets in Iran, thwarting immediate threats to the State of Israel. The Israel Defense Forces has fulfilled its mission. If the regime in Iran were to make the mistake of beginning a new round of escalation, we will be obligated to respond.
Israeli officials indicated the operation was a direct response to Iran's recent attack on October 1st, in which around 200 missiles were launched at Israeli cities and bases.
It was not just tit for tat. It was really within a strategy that think about the retaliation also as carving the way to a further escalation, namely to achieve this operational freedom of destroying, for example, batteries of both land-to-air missiles and land-to-land missiles.
This latest escalation follows decades of indirect conflict between Israel and Iran, often waged through regional proxies. As tensions mount, there is increased concern that the ongoing Middle Eastern hostilities could expand into a full-scale regional war, with Israel, Iran and possibly the Allied West drawn into open confrontation. As a consequence, international leaders were quick to call for an end to the attacks.
I am clear that Israel has the right to defend itself against Iranian aggression. I'm equally clear that we need to avoid further regional escalation and urge all sides to show restraint. Iran should not respond.
Iran, while acknowledging the attacks, claimed its air defenses intercepted many of the missiles and limited the overall impact of the strikes.
We'll, of course, keep you updated if there are any more breaking developments in the Middle East. And now on a domestic note, Paweł Szopa, a Polish entrepreneur and creator of a clothing brand, Red is Bad, has been arrested in the Dominican Republic. Authorities believe he conspired with the Government Strategic Reserves Agency under the previous Law and Justice government to secure contracts during the COVID-19 pandemic. Franciszek Pilis has more.
The man of the hour, Paweł Szopa, is a man who just a few years ago was hailed as a symbol of Polish patriotism through his anti-communist clothing brand Red is Bad. His business received unofficial co-signs from President Andrzej Duda and former Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. Today, however, he's a wanted man who's just been arrested on the other side of the world.
The consul in the Polish embassy in Panama is working out ways of getting Mr. Paweł Szopa to Poland. Yesterday, I said that it could be done in two ways. One would be extradition, because Paweł Szopa was detained on the basis of an Interpol notice. The second option would be deportation.
His lawyer claims that his client intended to return to the country of his own volition.
Mr. Paweł Szopa was in contact with the Dominican authorities, meaning both Interpol and the Migration Office of the Dominican Republic. On October 21st, before he was detained, he informed that he wants to willingly come back to Poland. It was supposed to happen on the 30th of October.
Szopa first found himself in the Polish persecution's crosshairs after the Polish Anti-Corruption Bureau caught the scent of potential foul play in December 2023. During the COVID-19 pandemic and after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Paweł Szopa's companies became the main suppliers of a swath of emergency products for the Polish Government Strategic Reserves Agency. He's alleged to have heavily hiked up the prices of some of the items. The former chief of the Polish Government Strategic Reserves Agency has also been arrested as part of the same investigation. Szopa is also accused of receiving upwards of $500 million Polish zloty, or close to $125 million, through no-tender government contracts.
Far-right anti-immigration demonstrators gathered in London for a march organized by Stephen Yaxley Lennon, better known as Tommy Robinson. Dubbed the Unite the Kingdom March, the event drew a substantial police presence aimed at preventing confrontations between opposing groups. Here's the full story.
The demonstrators focused on the migration crisis facing the UK. Official figures show that more migrants have crossed the English Channel this year than in all of last year.
There's people coming in, get everything for free. They've taken away our pension and heating, and it's just not fair. It's just not fair. So we've come here just to stand up for our country. We want our country back, and I honestly got no problem with immigrants, but illegal immigrants I have.
Protesters chanted "Free Tommy Robinson" as they began their march, with many carrying signs bearing Robinson's name. Robinson himself was absent from the rally, being held in police custody over the weekend ahead of his upcoming contempt of court hearing. He was charged separately under the Terrorism Act 2000 for failing to provide police with his mobile phone access code.
For me, I think because of our culture and the way things are going at the moment, we've got a government that just don't care about us. They just, if you come out for a march or whatever, they call you far right, and it's all wrong. I mean, we're not far right, we're just normal British people, standing up for our beliefs.
Anti-racism campaigners and trade union supporters organised a counter-protest in response to Saturday's event.
And with this, we conclude our news roundup and we turn to the conversation at the very end of the show, and of course are discussing Georgian elections. So Georgian pivotal elections are being framed as a choice between deepening ties with Western institutions or potentially reinforcing ties with Russia. According to the exit polls, Georgia's ruling party is set to come first. However, the exit polls disagree on who will be able to form a majority, Georgian Dream Party or the opposition groups. To discuss the outcome, I am joined here this evening by Oana Popescu-Zanthi, Director, Global Focus Center. Good evening, delighted to have you with us.
Hi, good evening.
So let me start with the exit polls. We have 70% of the votes counted. Georgian Dream seems to be winning. However, it does not mean that they will be able to form a majority in parliament.
It's true, and obviously, I mean, we've all seen the massive protests ahead of elections. I can only imagine we're going to have the same kind of scenes after elections, especially since there have already been accusations of rigging of the vote, aggression over some of the opposition party politicians. So already civil society is accusing the government of essentially stealing the vote. And then we also have the issue of forming a government, and this is a new experience for Georgia, not having an outright parliament majority and government, and having to form a coalition. And we already know that at least one of the parties, that of Georgi Gaharia, has pledged not to form a coalition with the Georgian Dream, but not to form a coalition with the main opposition party either. So it's really, at this point, I think we are into uncharted waters, and we still don't have the final results under the circumstances of conflicting exit polls. So I think at this point, we still cannot really say we know who's won.
Right, and Georgian Dream is known as a pro-Russian party. I mean, it is under the influence of Bidzina Ivanishvili, an oligarch. So my question is, are there doubts already about fairness of these elections? And have people noticed any Russian meddling? Were there any international watchdogs present? What is the state of this?
Oh, absolutely. As I said, there has already been quite significant, a significant number of accusations of vote rigging. Apart from that, if you compare Georgian elections with Moldovan elections that took place last weekend, alongside a referendum for EU accession, to inscribe it in the constitution, we can see traces of coordination of the Russian meddling, even at the level of the campaign preceding the vote. One of the kind of mantras of the pro-Russian forces in Moldova, for instance, was that a vote for pro-European forces and a vote in favor of the EU would automatically mean that Moldova would be dragged into the war against Ukraine. The same, we see the same in Georgia, where the rhetoric was similar on the part of the Georgian Dream. Georgian Dream cast itself as the party of peace, whereas the opposition would drag the country into the war that opposes Russia and Ukraine. So I think we see coordination when it comes to communication, strategic communications. When it comes to disinformation, actually disinformation in Georgia has been a weapon of choice for Russia and its domestic forces aligned with the Kremlin's agenda for years now. We've only seen an intensification during the elections campaign, nothing really new. So what we have essentially, I think, is even more complicated than just a choice between Europe and Russia. What we risk having if the Georgian Dreams wins over 50% of the vote is basically a belt of instability around the EU's borders, where countries like Georgia have made a choice, and actually it's not the countries, it's its government, to align not necessarily with Russia, but to give up on the firm pursuit of pro-European, pro-democratic reform, and rather play a multi-vectorial game where they engage with China, which has an overwhelming presence in Georgia already in strategic infrastructure. They engage with Turkey, with Russia, with the Gulf states. with basically anyone who's willing to pay. And the priority for these governments is not really national interest even, it's actually their own political survival and the survival of the corrupt networks that support them. So if we have a victory of the Georgian dream tonight, I think we can safely say that we have lost Georgia, we, the Euro-Atlantic community, and we have lost it as we have been increasingly losing our entire neighborhood, and in part because we haven't played a geopolitical game the way we should have played it in front of Russian aggression, and there has been a perception of weakness by European and Euro-Atlantic forces, which has determined these countries to turn to other partners.
So do you expect any unrest following this vote in the country?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's assured, because there's a massive pro-European opposition at the level of society, not just the strong civil society that Georgia used to have before the foreign agents law, which basically sees civil society now being de facto in exile. But Georgia has a very pro-European society. Some of them may not have turned out to vote. Some of them may even have voted for the Georgian dream, because there's a paradox that I think is not very well understood at the level of Brussels and Washington, and that is, again, being pro-EU and wishing to partake in the benefits of potential EU accession doesn't mean that Georgians are necessarily happy with EU policies in the country. And rather than the whole election, and again, I'm talking Georgia as well as Moldova, as well as some countries in the Balkans, rather than the whole choice being between Europe and Russia, in many cases, the choice that we see, which may seem anti-European, is actually for fear of Russia, because these countries are looking at the kind of support that we are providing Ukraine, and they see that we are providing enough for Ukraine to resist, but not to win. And they legitimately wonder, well, if Russia were to invade Georgia tomorrow or to invade Moldova tomorrow, would the West be standing up for us more than it does for Ukraine, which is a pivotal, very strategic country for the West? Well, probably not. So then we're on our own and we have to balance everyone. So what that generates is essentially a very high level of polarization within these countries. And I think we're going to see more of this following the elections, taking the form of unrest in the streets and protests by the pro-European opposition against the government, and difficulty perhaps in forming a government. So yeah, I expect that for a while things are not going to go smoothly in Georgia.
And what about people such as the president, Zurabishvili, who formed this Georgian charter? Could the opposition do something even if the Georgian dream claims victory?
Well, it very much depends on the final result. If it's clear enough in favor of the Georgian dream, I don't see much of a margin of maneuver there. Obviously, there's a scenario that if the Georgian dream wins by a very narrow margin, there could potentially be a possibility for a coalition of the opposition forces, but that is highly unlikely. We already know that this is difficult to happen, even if the opposition forces win. And the president has very limited room for maneuver, despite her standing by the pro-European voices constantly since the Georgian dream has started monopolizing power. So frankly speaking, I think there could be some attempts at perhaps playing with the results and trying to find various ways of forming a government, but it's again depending on the final result. it's difficult if the Georgian dream wins, and especially since they have the power now. So, at least in this region, especially when you're dealing with a strongman government, whoever has the power will not relinquish it, will not give up the privileges they have.
Absolutely. Oana Popescu-Zamfi, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching World News Tonight. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.